What up, Muggles? This is Fyrebyrd, and I'm here with new guest Fwooper, and you're listening to the Dusty Cauldron, where we talk about all things Harry Potter and the witchy world at large. Today, we're going to dig into an episode that I know everybody's been waiting for, and it is everything that is wrong with the Cursed Child and why it should never have been labeled canon. I'll jump right in with the first thing that I wrote down, and I would like to point out with when I went through and wrote my notes, I sort of wrote them down as the issues came to me. So they're really sort of labeled in levels of annoyance, not really like in any sort of chronological timeline throughout the play. So the first one I have is that in the final fight, Harry is disarmed, which is kind of funny because that's his go-to spell. But then his son causes a diversion, but with absolutely no description or anything showing him becoming in possession of a wand once more. He suddenly starts casting offensive magic back to win. And I am like, we know that Harry can't cast wandless magic, so I'm just unable to process how that's supposed to work as a scene.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes with the whole theme of the book in that there's no consistency between this and the original series. I mean, they do reference back to it, but so much is just all over the place, and it feels like it's just not indicative of what should be a canon story.
Absolutely. Like, with how things play out, I don't feel like the author ever read the books. He must have seen the movies in order to be able to pull some character names or something, but like with how this plays out, there's no way he read the books. There's no way.
I would tend to agree. The way I feel that this was written is, to me, it feels like a fan fiction written by somebody who probably saw the movies and then talked to a friend of theirs who may have read the books.
Yeah, I think that's totally valid. And you know what? I've read better fan fiction.
I have also read better fan fiction, and a lot of better fan fiction that revolved around time travel.
Yeah, for sure. Another, like, right up there with the top things that just fill me with rage when reading this would be Cedric joining the Death Eaters out of shame for not winning the Triwizard Tournament. I don't know how much more they could have underlined not understanding Cedric's character. It's just glaring.
Yeah, and of all the things for them to have him do as his, grand statement, he kills Neville at the Battle for Hogwarts, that's his big turning point.
Right? Like, what is that?
Of all the decisions for, okay, we're going to have this whole alternate storyline in which Voldemort, becomes the ruler and becomes all powerful. Why was that the choice? Why choose to have Cedric go evil? Why choose to kill Neville and have that as the turning point?
Definitely. I feel like it was this big reach because we have the introduction into like how we're bringing this new time turner into play, which we'll dig into that in a minute. That introduction's coming with like Amos Diggory present. So I feel like it's a reach of like, oh, we have to be including Cedric because the initial like reason to do this was so that Cedric doesn't die. But let's just forget everything about who Cedric was as a person so that we can like jam all these pieces together to quote unquote make them work.
Yeah, it feels like they had one idea at the beginning, which, I mean, as a fundamental idea of like, let's bring Cedric back. Cool, but then they tried to shoehorn it into every aspect of the story. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the true flaw, because if we want to look at Amos's side, sure, I can understand why he would want his son back, but then trying to use that as a catalyst for all of these insane events, it really doesn't make sense with the original stories.
Agreed. Sort of in the same vein of talking about issues with plot points with Cedric Diggory, why don't we also talk about like another example of not understanding the mechanics of magic within the Harry Potter universe? So we're having the second challenge happen during the Triwizard Tournament, and the two wayward children, for lack of a nicer thing to call them, cast Engorgio on Cedric while he's using the bubblehead charm, and somehow this magically makes him float up out of the water and away like a balloon, because somehow casting Engorgio turns oxygen into helium and makes it able to float a full human body out of water. Like, what is that about?
Well, and on top of that, they cast Engorgio on Cedric himself. So are we led to believe that this charm is dynamic? So is it going to also increase as he increases?
Yeah, valid point. Like, shouldn't he, and if I'm remembering correctly, like, they tried to, like, localize it to his head or whatever, but shouldn't it have just burst the bubblehead charm?
That was exactly what I had expected to happen initially when I was going through the book, is that it was going to burst the bubblehead charm and he was going to have to swim up to the surface and forfeit.
Mm-hmm.
I did not expect him to float away. And then their big solution for getting Ron and Hermione back together is to launch fireworks behind him while he's floating away that say Ron loves Hermione.
Yeah, what was that?
Like, I get he was trying to bring Rose back. He had this whole plan. But of all the things, because at this point in time, weren't Ron and Hermione having a huge fight in the original book?
They were in this weird no man's land because they're sort of just past the whole I'm not an owl thing where Ron's refusing to talk to Hermione. They're just or to talk to Harry, and Hermione's caught in the middle. And they're just past like the fight of the Yule Ball. So they're about to enter into another wave of awkwardness because of her being Crumb's champion. But up until the thing he would miss, but up until this challenge is completed, they're not really fighting, but things are not great. If I remember correctly, like there's a point where it's described as just like overly polite to one another post Boxing Day fight.
What you actually said just there reminded me of the other major issue here is, so if the fireworks were supposed, the fireworks say Ron loves Hermione, to me, that says this is supposed to be something for her to see. Mm-hmm. If the tournament just started, she's underwater.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. She's unconscious underwater. But somehow it just magically works because we're shoehorning once more.
Yeah, so just another inconsistency with the original series because, I mean, wait, Ron was also underwater at that time, wasn't he?
Yeah, because Ron is the last one up with Harry. There is the chance.
At the point this happened, they should have both been locked down at the bottom of the lake, so nobody would have seen this except for spectators. So this makes no sense.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it doesn't read well in the play and we're supposed to assume that Hermione is above the surface, because I'm thinking of the order in which people came up. And did Crumb come up first? Like, I think Harry reaches the bottom first, and then Cedric gets there, and then Crumb comes. But I feel like when the scoring happened, didn't Crumb get the highest score besides Harry? So
I believe so, because Harry was down there trying to rescue the others, and Crumb just swooped down, grabbed the chain, and left. Mm-hmm. So while Harry reached the location earlier than Crumb basically was just like, I'm going to win, took his champion and left.
Following like the actual parameters of the challenge.
Yeah. But the way I kind of read this was that the Engorgio happened very shortly after they jumped into the water.
Yeah, it's sort of an en route. So I think you're right. I was starting to think, oh, well, maybe Crumb got back before Cedric and that's what happened. But yeah, we don't end up with this situation where Cho's just like floating in the middle of the lake while Cedric floats away into space. So he hadn't reached the bottom yet. And he did reach the bottom before Crumb did.
Yeah,
So she didn't see it. Ron didn't see it. Like, there's no point. But yet this is like, oh yeah, now they're back together again.
Yeah.
Yikes. I also really struggled with the Trolley Witch. This sudden, like, realization or reveal that she's some immortal creature that has long talons and essentially will hold a student hostage on the train if they're trying to get off the train. First of all, what is that? But that, second of all, so we're saying that this is what she's been the whole time because she's millennia old, and somehow magically she let Death Eaters on in book 7 to kidnap Luna Lovegood and attempt to kidnap Ginny, but she wasn't there. She let the Dementors get on the train in book 3. Like, so assuming that this, her being a creature is a real thing, is her job only to hold students hostage, not to protect them?
Yeah, you actually addressed one of the things I had written down on my notes, is that they, in this book, in The Cursed Child, they portray her as basically just a warden. Mm-hmm. She states other people have tried to get off the train before and nobody has yet succeeded. So does she not care if anybody else comes on the train at all? Does she not care what happens to the kids on the train? Because, you know, I would assume that she was also there. I forget which book number, but when Harry was in the invisibility cloak, got petrified, and then his face stomped on.
Yeah, book 5.
Like, is she not gonna notice something like that happen? Is she not gonna protect the children from the other children? Is she only there to keep them prisoner?
Yeah, that's what it reads as. And also, like, what creature she is supposed to be. Like, so she has long talons, but we don't get a lot more beyond that. But, like, from what we know from, like, magical creatures revealed throughout the series and throughout, like, the Fantastic Beasts series, like, there's nothing that matches what she is. Like, what is she?
Yeah, I don't know. And if she's going to be this, you know, integral character in this, why have we never heard about her before in the original 7 books? Mm-hmm. I feel like that could have been utilized. If they want this character to exist, then they could have utilized it previously as a much more impactful creature.
Yeah. I feel like it plays with this whole concept, which I think I've said in previous episodes, that, like, within the world of fan fiction, it seems as if anything can exist because Harry's such an unobservant narrator. But I really feel like this takes it too far.
I would agree.
Like, there's too many things that Harry experienced where if she were like this during canon, he should have seen something. So, I just don't like it. And it really, like, I don't know that I ever fully even made it to suspension of disbelief because this play is so bad, but this really tore me out of it. Like, the first time I read it through, I, like, put it down and walked away when that scene happened because I was like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing we should talk about is that this shouldn't have been a book. It is very clearly a play. It does not read well as a book. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't read well as a play either. So I mentioned before we were recording, but I'll mention this again. But I've listened to the visually impaired version of this, which is not exactly an audiobook, but it's a reading for people who are unable to read the physical version of this. And that, while it tells a lot better than this book, still it's written as if you're supposed to be watching this in a theater. In fact, there are many scene directions in which it talks about things happening around a theater, which really takes you out of the story because you feel like you're just missing out on a piece of this.
Definitely. And also, I had a problem with how many stage directions there were. Like, it would be even harder to read without them, right?
Oh, yeah.
But as a published playwriter, you are asked to take so much stage direction out by the publishing house because they're like, you're making it so that no one can make any directive decisions when they put the play on. So they don't want them in there. So, like, this is only published because J.K. Rowling gave it the stamp of approval. Like, this would never have been published if it were trying to stand on its own feet.
Yeah, and some of the choices that they made for things, I feel like they could have just eliminated and it would have read just fine. For instance, I remember one passage where they described that a voice came and it was the same actor as another character. Completely unnecessary to have in the book. It could have been edited out, but it feels like they really didn't send this through an editor either. They just took the play as it was written and just
like ran with it.
Put a binding on it and published it.
Yeah. definitely. It's a, what do they call it? An unbaited fan fiction.
Yeah.
Let's talk about other holes. So we've got this whole penultimate scene with the fight happening in the church in Godric's Hollow on the night that the Potters are murdered. And you're telling me that as Voldemort's casually waltzing down the main street and heading to try to commit his goal of murdering an entire family that evening, he doesn't notice a major magical battle happening in the church that he has to walk past to get there?
Well, yeah, and I mean, we've seen other battles like this occur. They're loud.
Mm-hmm. And bright,
People
like lights are flashing.
People are shouting spells when spells are deflected off of shield charms and things like that. They cause destruction. There's no way he walked down here and didn't just go, huh, what's going on in there?
Right? And so let's like suspend our disbelief about what we've seen in the films of like what a magical battle looks like and assume that there's a way to cast silently and have no light fire or whatever. We still have it established as canon within the series that strong magical people, which Voldemort would fall into that category, can feel the presence of magic. So even if somehow magically there's not light and no one's yelling and there's not destruction happening, even though we know that there is because it's described as they're destroying the church, he would feel the like movement of power because of the forces going against each other. Like, it's just completely asinine to think that he just like la-di-da, that's not my problem, and keeps going.
Yeah, and this just fits with the rest of it. They had an idea of where they wanted these characters to meet and how they wanted it to play out, so they just threw out precedent to shoehorn in the final meeting, which they wanted to have, which was the meeting between him and his, illegitimate daughter that he, never knew about. It's never come up in any other story, despite the fact that he's had many interactions with, Bellatrix and stuff. Or was there time travel in her birth? I don't think they were super clear on that part.
Yeah. While we're kind of on that, I want to talk about how this doesn't make any sense to me. That Draco doesn't know about the existence of Delphi. So there is no unaccounted time for Bellatrix to have gone missing. And she realistically would have needed to have gone missing for like 5 months of the pregnancy because she would have been showing in order to have it hidden and have Draco not know that she gave birth. But we don't have that missing time. And let's assume, like, based on how things are described in the play, Delphi must have been born around February of 1988. We don't get a birthday for her, but based on, like, her age and what she's aware of and all that, it must have been around February. The trio is at Malfoy Manor in March. Like, Bellatrix would still have enough of a postpartum body for it to be obvious that a birth had happened, and certainly for people who are around her more than just that interaction at Malfoy Manor, such as Draco or Narcissa, would be very aware that she was postpartum. But there's just no reference to that. There's no evidence to support it. But we're just saying that there's even talk in the lead up of Bellatrix having been in Diagon Alley within that 5-month window leading up to March. Because we hear reference with, like, I think it's, I can't think of the name of the guy who was, like, stealing all the stuff from the Order of the Phoenix, but, like, he had referenced seeing Bellatrix in Diagon Alley when they were, like, questioning him about, like, where's the necklace that you stole from Sirius? And she wasn't pregnant. Like, so now we're just supposed to believe that she has some magical means to conceal the pregnancy, I guess. Mundungus, that's his name.
I guess that kind of fits with their whole concept of we're kind of just throwing the things we know about magic out the window. So is she casting some kind of illusion on herself that she's maintaining at all times?
Maybe she has some sort of enchanted clothing that can hide it, even though we've, like, not had reference to that. Or maybe you're right, like you had said a moment ago, maybe there was some sort of time travel involved with her conception and delivery.
Yeah, it felt very disjointed and out of the blue for the fact that she's she was sired by Voldemort and Bellatrix.
Mhm.
Like,
I don't think Bellatrix wouldn't have been shouting from the rooftops about how she got to sleep with her, like, man that she's obsessed with. And not only did she get to sleep with him, but she's having his child.
well, and that was the other thing. So it's explained that, you know, she was raised by this family of dark witches and wizards and, you know, wasn't allowed to go to Hogwarts, which presumably was because they were keeping her hidden.
Mm-hmm.
But in what world would Bellatrix not have told everybody she encountered? How would, you know, nobody know? How would the Malfoys not have heard even a whisper of this, in which Draco should have heard?
Mm-hmm. And like the picking of auxiliary quote unquote evil characters for usage throughout this play just like boggle my brain. Like the Rowell family is suddenly trusted enough by Bellatrix to raise her child. Like what is that? And like as someone who's so obsessed with Voldemort, like this really is like the ultimate win for that type of like fangirl, for lack of a better way to describe her. So I just don't buy that she was silent about it.
Yeah, I also don't buy it. So if you want to explain that away, fine. You can explain it away with the time turners and stuff, because the Malfoys very clearly had a time turner. You know, that was another plot point in the book that they had that was a hidden away. So if you want to go that direction, I feel like you should have at least stated it.
Yeah. I feel like it's like such a crutch to this story, but I guess we can accept it. But yeah, you should point it out. Maybe they thought they were being like, don't tell everything to the reader. Let them infer it from the things that they're reading. And I'm like, you didn't drop enough breadcrumbs for that to be a believable plot point, but okay. Okay, one of the things that has really bothered me. So we're taking Harry Potter. Harry Potter, the person who lost both of his parents and lived in an abusive household and who family is everything to, and we're saying in this story, he's going to tell his child, I wish I wasn't your father. And we're supposed to believe that?
Thank you. One of my biggest issues of this story is that he's emotionally abusive to his son.
Mm-hmm.
The entire time. He treats him like an outcast. He goes so far as threatening McGonagall that if she doesn't keep him apart from the one friend he has, while the whole 7 books that he's a part of are predicated on these strong friendships,
mm-hmm.
that if she doesn't keep them separated, he will bring the force of his position at the ministry down on her.
Which, what is that? Like, since when is he some, like, power-crazed, gross ministry official? Like, he's an anarchist throughout the whole original series. So, honestly, it's questionable that he goes to work for the Aurors at all, except that he has a hero complex. And now we're saying he's turned into everything that he ever hated about the ministry. And, like, is turning on McGonagall, who's one of the only people who's ever been there for him that is still alive.
Yeah, and everybody just goes along with it. You know, Ginny kind of gives him a side eye, but she also just seems very submissive to him as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout this story, she's like, I don't like what you've done,
but I'm
going to go along with you so that we can fix it.
Yeah, and it's like, this is actually another point that I feel like is strong evidence that this person never read the books. Like, because this is taking movie Ginny and actually making her worse, which I didn't think was possible. Like, in book Ginny never even touches this story.
Yeah, it doesn't fit with me. I also don't like the dynamic that Harry and Hermione have at work. Yeah. He does not treat her like she's in charge, like she's the boss. In fact, she doesn't treat him like she's his boss, really. She kind of just goes along with a lot of what he says, despite the fact that she is the Minister of Magic.
And has always had a strong and directive personality. Like, that is a canon trait of Hermione. Yeah, 100%. And also just, like, one of the major overarching themes of Harry Potter is about like love and how it makes you stronger, and it's how you conquer things. And Harry learns that painfully over and over and over again and uses it to win a war. And now he's going to withhold love from his son? That we're saying we believe that that's something he would do? Gross.
And of all the people who, like, it seemed like, despite the fact that he was portrayed as kind of, you know, not loving his son, I honestly felt like Malfoy showed more love and affection towards his son than Harry ever did during the story. He was the one who was driving a lot of this, we have to do these things, we have to take all these necessary steps. Harry was just like, we've got to find him, but I don't really know what to do. Whereas Malfoy actually came up with some ideas.
Yeah, and he's like, we got to find him and we got to keep him apart. So Draco doesn't have a good example of like what a good father is, but Harry kind of does because of Arthur. So it's odd to me that we see them behave in the reverse when they're adults, and like Draco's actually being a good father and Harry's being terrible and toxic.
I would also argue that Harry has several father figures in his life, because he's got Arthur, but while it was short-lived, Sirius also took on the role of a father for him for a period of time. Dumbledore was a poor father, but, you know, he's seen all the different sides of what it is to have these different types of fathers. So I feel like it makes no sense for him to take on this role of the kind of standoffish, oh, you're not the son I wanted, but I named you after the two most influential men at Hogwarts, you know, as he explains. So
yeah, and we get that scene at the end of the main series where he's like, it doesn't matter what house you're in, and then like clearly it does, because the moment he's actually sorted into Slytherin, Harry starts to become an ass.
Yeah, and in the alternative timeline, after they first go back, when he talks about being in Slytherin, they're very adamant about how he's in Gryffindor and it's the right place for him and all of these things. So it's very clear that Harry always wanted him to be in Gryffindor, and it does matter to him what house he ended up in.
When all of these different plot lines resolve, so much therapy is going to be needed. It's not even funny.
Oh, 100%.
Can we also talk about how just like every single moment with Ron is terrible and frankly uncomfortable? Like his humor is weird and sometimes gross, and like just who he becomes as an adult, one, doesn't feel canonically accurate, but two, is just like really uncomfortable as a character, and I hated it.
That's another one where I feel like they just tried to shoehorn a type of storyline into him. They really wanted him to be this guy who took over for Fred and George at the joke shop and live that life. And I feel like it does not fit, especially after all they've been through, and especially with him being married to Hermione. Why is that what they choose to go with? And he's supposed to be their kind of comic relief character.
But he's not funny.
I also don't think he ever would have ended up with, was it Patty Patil that he ended up with?
Oh, yeah, in the alternate, shoot. Padma,
that's what it was. That felt really forced to me as well, because honestly, even if he didn't end up with Hermione, he never really seemed that comfortable with her in the original series. So why is that who they decide to end up with? Like, I understand that they supposedly bonded at the ball, but because he never got jealous over Hermione being with Krum?
Yeah, I don't know, the whole thing. And like their one quasi-romantic interaction in the series wasn't good. Like, I don't get it. I was not on board for that.
Yeah.
This one that I had a problem with takes us back to that like final fight, but suddenly we're like using transfiguration with the level of believability to Polyjuice, which we know canonically doesn't really work, but then also it just magically starts wearing off in the middle of the fight because that's convenient as a plot device to be like, oh, you're not really who you looked like. Like, it, Polyjuice would have made more sense, but then it's also insane that we're saying that Albus knows what Polyjuice is, but also thinks he could just whip it up in 5 minutes for the fight. Like, Polyjuice takes over a month to make. But so if we're gonna go with transfiguration instead, like, let's be realistic about that, and let's acknowledge that it doesn't just disappear. Either you remove it or someone casts a spell to remove it from you. It doesn't just fade off of your features.
Well, and they talk about, they say, let's do transfiguration. We have several powerful witches and wizards here. Are they implying that they channeled their power together to hold up this illusion of transfiguration?
That's what it
Or
seems
did
like.
one of them do it? It just didn't really fit with things that have happened. Do we have precedent for multiple people channeling into one spell like that?
We do, actually, for the shields cast over the castle during the final battle. But it's, like, rarely used. But then it's also, like, the example that we do have for it is that it's very strong. So you're telling me, like, the strongest form of transfiguration that could ever be used just magically fades away in a couple minutes?
With some of what are currently supposed to be the strongest witches and wizards. And was McGonagall there at the church with them? I honestly can't remember.
I don't think so. I think it was just the parents. But you know what? I can't either. And I think it's because my brain is trying to block out the entire play. And it's just, it's taking it piece by piece.
Because, they are very familiar with one of the best transfigurists in the known Harry Potter universe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, canonically, that is her thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, why is that the route they would go? It makes no sense. And to your point earlier, the Polyjuice one, because I forgot to address that. His idea is, let's break into Bagshot's house because she probably has all the things needed.
Including the rare ingredients that you have to use to make Polyjuice. Like, what?
Yeah, like, she's just got those laying around, so let's break into her house. He also made it sound like they planned on stealing a wand from her at one point.
So insane.
Like,
almost every plan that Albus comes up with is insane. And that's a plot point I can accept because he's a child. But,
yeah.
like, it's still just nuts. And, like, he's taken seriously. I don't get it.
Yeah. I also, I think, personally, that, well, first, let's address this. Scorpius is a terrible name for a child.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I get that you're trying to stick with this kind of reptilian theme of names between Draco and Scorpius, even though scorpions are not reptiles, they're closer to arachnids. But, like,
I think it's the stars.
What is that name?
Yeah, I think it's the whole premise that, like, everybody in the Black family, which I would like to point out that Draco is not directly in the Black family, he's in the Malfoy family, but whatever. Like, all of them have some sort of celestial name, like Sirius, Draco is named after like Draconis or whatever. And there's a whole bunch more that are actually, like, more proper in the Black line that are like astronomy based names. So I think that's what they're trying to go with, is like the Scorpio constellation, but it still doesn't play well.
Yeah, you've got that whole stupid thing. And then honestly, I liked him better as a character than Albus anyway.
Mm-hmm.
He was a way more developed character. He had a lot more of a personality, in my opinion. And, like, his plans and his development through the story were just better.
Yeah. He was, in my opinion, genuinely a better person than Albus. And I'm actually, like, I still don't support, like, Harry being a terrible father, but I, like, as I'm thinking about what I hate about Albus is that he is every bad trait of Harry. Like, is that why Harry hated him? Because he was seeing a representation of what he hates in himself?
I mean, it could be. A lot of this my issues with Harry and his relationship with everybody is predicated on the fact that he has the worst communication skills of pretty much any main character. He does not communicate well with his wife. He does not communicate with his friends. He has poor relationships with, it honestly sounds, with all of his children. Like, he even makes kind of a like snide comment about James towards the end of the book when he's like, I'm not really like that much like James. Everything comes easily to him. I had to work for stuff. Like, it sounds like you kind of resent James as well because he's more adept at things.
Yeah. He needs some therapy. I mean, I did a whole episode on how the series, like, basically every character needs therapy, and it's, like, majorly missing from the wizarding world. But Harry really underlines it because, like, I get it. He went through a lot as a kid and to survive a war and all of that. But, like, isn't your whole idea as a parent that, like, you want to make things better for your child? You want them to have more and better than what you had? And so it's weird to be like, oh, well, it's not fair that they had it easier.
You would think so, especially after he grew up with Petunia and Vernon, who very clearly had a favorite child, treated him horribly. You would think that he would never want any child he raised to feel like there was a favorite in the house and felt like that they didn't matter.
Yeah. I don't know how it made it so deep in my list because it's, I would feel like one of the top things that bug me, but it must not be because of when I wrote it down. But like the whole reason that this story exists, I'm sorry, we're saying that a random Death Eater, like Theodore Knott, who shows no predilection to working with devices or anything, like he does show intelligence because we see that he's in Newt level potions, but nothing from that would, to me, would say, oh, it's logical that this character is going to make the world's most powerful time turner twice because he made 2 of them, that will completely ignore Croker's law about the 5-hour limit for safe travel and be able to just jump decades in time with no damage to anyone. That, like, I guess he's probably the most probable if we're going to pick a random Death Eater for the Malfoys to contract with, but it's still not believable. It's just very yikes.
Yeah, I have a lot of issues with the time travel aspect of this whole entire thing, especially. So, not only the fact that it does not make sense that, one, the prototype is just this one that's out there, but Malfoy's had this super special, shiny, secret one, and they made it very, like, emphasized that it was made of higher quality materials and it was shiny and gold because that's what the Malfoys like.
Yeah.
But on top of that, they break so many paradoxical rules of time travel from most, theories of time travel that it really makes no sense. Like, there's no, I mean, they did this in the original 3rd book as well, broke a lot of rules about paradoxes and time travel. But this one just takes it a step further and is completely asinine. And then there's the crazy part of, so they went back in time, they did the stuff in the maze, they sent Cedric to his death, essentially. And then they're taken back in time further, and then she's able to just crush the time turner in her hand. And it falls to pieces after the Ministry had to use, well, they used stupefy charms on them to shatter them all previously. Like, but she's just gonna crunch it in her hand. And
she's
that
all
didn't
powerful.
cause any ripples in the fabric of space-time, didn't cause any problems besides getting them stuck there.
Yeah. Completely insane. It's like, do you remember, like, a decade ago, I feel like there was the popular, like, YouTube series of, like, how it should have ended. And the one for Harry Potter was so ridiculous because it was clearly done by someone who's not read the books or seen the movies. They're just like, oh, I just travel back to 1981 and I kill Voldemort. The end. Like, it feels like that same kind of take of like, oh, this time turner can do anything. It doesn't follow any of the rules within this universe.
Yeah, that's kind of how it feels. And it's just such a weird decision to just say, while these were created by the same person, they're fundamentally, the magic behind them is the same. This one used nicer materials, and therefore it doesn't have to follow the rules.
Right? It's absolutely asinine. Also, like, when they're doing all of this travel, you're telling me that no one in the crowd, including the judging officials, has any problem with two randos just disarming Cedric in the middle of the Dragon Challenge? Like, that wasn't an immediate, like, stop, what's going on, someone has to give him his wand back?
Yeah, and their idea is, we're going to dress up as students from Durmstrang and just go disarm this guy. All of the people from Durmstrang are there. Their idea was, nobody will recognize us, or nobody will question us because we're from one of the other schools. That entire school and their headmaster are there. They brought a small group of their school for this tournament. Mm-hmm. They're going to know that you don't belong to them.
Mm-hmm. And they're going to take issue with you making it look like they're cheating in the challenge. And, like, the person who sees them and is, like, sort of sketched by it is Hermione. And you're telling me she just keeps her mouth shut?
Yeah.
No questions asked?
No possible way that's the case. They also did not stick with their own rules in this thing. So they stated they had to be at the place that they were going to do the thing, because you could not move or change locations when you utilize the time turner. Mm-hmm. Then they use the time turner, and then they walk around until they find Cedric, or when they're in the lake, they swim around until they find Cedric. Oh. Is that not changing locations?
It is. And let's not jump past how they got in the lake. Oh, so we can now flush humans from the toilet into the lake of Hogwarts? So have we been flushing human waste into the lake for centuries? Is that what we're saying?
So funny enough, Myrtle actually does address that, if you remember. She says that it violates some kind of, like, she doesn't exactly say it, but she alludes to it violating, like, waste dumping laws in one passage. So Myrtle actually does bring it up. But also, she said this sink leads to the lake. In what world were they small enough to go down the sink drain?
I'm like, I guess if we're saying all of the sink drains were the same size as the sink drain that led to the Chamber of Secrets, but then why are we building such inefficient plumbing systems?
Well, and why didn't they, why didn't the parents, when they go in there, just be like, oh, we should just go down this sink drain and end up exactly where they're going to be? No, they go the long way around and everything.
Mm-hmm. Ridiculous. So frustrating and doesn't make any sense.
No.
Lower in the priority of things that bother me but still bothers me. So we're now saying that Delphini magically inherited broomless flight. That's not something that you have to be taught. You just are born able to do it, and that's how you prove that someone's your father?
Yeah, and like, yeah, that makes no sense. She, when she's talking to the fake Voldemort, in Harry, she's like, I basically have developed this skill for you. And he's like, oh, so you want to be as powerful as me? No, I would never subscribe to that. It's like, so that whole character arc just makes no sense. She's trying to be exactly like her father, but not like her father, not as strong as him.
Like, I don't want to be threatening, but also this prophecy does say that I am the all-powerful augury.
Also, where did this prophecy come from?
My headcanon is
by a seer of some sort.
Yeah. My headcanon is it's also Sybil, because everything she says is fucking insane. But it's never said in the play where the prophecy came from, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, and then on the whole idea of, looking at the future and divination, there's that, like, short interaction with Bane in the forest, in which Bane's just like, yep, looked at the stars. There's a dark cloud around your kid. Now get out of my forest or I'll probably murder you.
That tracks.
Like, that part of it tracks. In what world is he helping Harry?
Exactly.
Like, he's already told Harry multiple times, stay the fuck out of my forest. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on here. Sorry if I'm not.
We put not safe for work on the thing.
And then Harry's just back there, and he's like, all right, I guess I'll tell you this one thing, but then get out of my forest again.
Mm-hmm. It's totally nuts. Also, I'm circling back to the, like, flight thing for just half a second. So, like, are we implying that this skill is something that you, like, genetically develop? And if we are, so therefore it's inheritable, would that not mean that either Bellatrix or Voldemort, but most likely Voldemort, have some sort of creature lineage as part of their bloodline to have this skill that is not like a human wizard skill?
Potentially. It either has to be that or it's some kind of long lost dark magic that they imbued themselves with. But
Maybe.
My kind of follow-up to that would be, so then if, you know, because part of Voldemort's soul and therefore his being was attached to Harry, does that mean that Harry potentially could?
Oh, that would have been fascinating. Well, that would make the final scene in the movies, the battle, make more sense. Where, like, they're flying through the grounds together.
Yeah.
That garbage.
That whole, like, no spell is cast, therefore it's implied that they can just fly.
Mm-hmm. Totally nuts. Well, I actually made it through my whole list of this play is garbage. Do you have anything that we didn't cover?
Yeah, I do have a couple things that weren't covered. One is just the straight up racism against France.
Oh, yeah.
In the book. Like, 3 different times they talk about, like, or make snide comments about the French, like the students from France.
That's a really good point.
He calls for cheers from Hogwarts, he calls from cheers from Durmstrang, and then when he calls for Beauxbatons, he's like, oh, I guess the French aren't really into it today.
It makes me wonder if the author has some, like, issue with France.
Yeah, which, I mean, would be kind of par for the course for J.K. Rowling and just picking somebody who has intolerances towards a group of people.
Yeah, that's valid.
So that part just kind of, like, it irked me when it came up. It was just, like, very strange.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember it being that way, like, in the original Goblet of Fire, where they were, like, talking about how, like, or talking that much about, like, the French students in the crowd.
Yeah.
It just seemed strange.
It's really valid. And, you know, I think when I read through it, it read to me more like sexism. But
I can see that too.
Yeah, but I actually, like, I think that just blatant racism is super valid.
But, you know, I mean, it's a J.K. Rowling book, a woman who claims to be a staunch feminist, and they're basically, again, very few female strong characters.
Mm-hmm.
There are, 2, maybe 3, like, in this whole book.
Mm-hmm. And then she still, like, just messes them up in so many ways that, like, it really detracts from their strength and, like, shows a lot of her internalized misogyny. Yeah. But what can you expect from a TERF?
Yeah, that's 100% accurate. Another complaint I had is kind of with the whole how much they change, or how Hermione was kind of like the core person with the changes each time.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the first time they go through and change the past, Hermione then becomes a teacher, and she's mean and vicious towards the students, and, like, has completely forgotten her friendships and stuff with Harry and Ron, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Despite all they've gone through. I feel like that just doesn't fit with her character. I could see, like, if they want to make her a teacher, and have her career path change, fine. But to have her become basically the new Snape.
Yeah. Because somehow she had that in her, just waiting to be revealed.
And then in our next story arc, she's now the leader of the rebel forces, and she's not allowed to go out into public because they'll find her if she just steps outside, which honestly never made sense in any of the Harry Potter books to me, why like being inside of a building makes it so you can't be found. Like, I understand they use magic to hide things, but like the moment they step outside, they're susceptible to being found.
Like when I go and set to make a house unplottable, I literally stop the spell on the front stoop. I don't like cover my front yard.
Yeah.
So dumb. We should clarify, because we've crapped a lot on J.K. Rowling. We should clarify that who we're really, really crapping on in this episode is actually Jack Thorne, who wrote this. Yeah. We're still going to crap on J.K. Rowling, but Jack Thorne is trash.
Yes, this is accurate. But J.K. Rowling did read and approve this to be published, so she's 100% as culpable as he is.
Oh, definitely. He threw a flaming bag of dog shit on her front step, and she was like, "Oh, it's beautiful. We must share it with the world."
Yeah. So yeah, my issues with like them using Hermione as like a pivot point kind of seemed weird, but yet they kept Ron basically the same character. They just made him more of a joke, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, I really didn't like the whole arc of making him this like sniveling, subservient husband who has no say in his family.
Yeah, it was kind of weird, and it doesn't fit with who he is in the canon series. So like, do I think that like a relationship where there's like one stronger personality than another works? Absolutely. But this was two very strong personalities. Like, Ron was never not a strong personality.
Well, and after all they went through because in that storyline, they've still gone through the battle for Hogwarts. They've still fought off Voldemort and saved the world. And now he's a house husband, essentially, who his wife doesn't trust him to do things correctly, so she like sends him to do things, and if he messes it up, she's gonna follow up. It does not fit with the characters.
Yeah, definitely.
Looking through for the things that we haven't covered yet. Oh, one thing I did want to talk about that I found very weird is the whole idea of Harry's baby blanket.
Yeah.
And him basically, so he's like, I gave this invisibility cloak to your brother, and I'm giving you my baby blanket because it made me feel safe, but also I'm going to take it back from you on, what's it called? Hallows Eve. And then that was their kind of plot device to communicate where in time they were. It just seemed an odd choice to me.
Yeah, I guess it sort of tracks with him just being a terrible father. So, like, I'm gonna ungift something to you. Like, but it's another just, like, insane choice that's shoehorned in to make something work.
Yeah, it felt like the only reason it was there was so... It kind of felt like they wrote the ending first. Like, this is how we want this to play out, so we have to kind of force this item in earlier and then make you pretty much forget about it until the very end.
And, like, so unnecessarily, in my opinion, because we need the baby blanket to be, like, how they're going to communicate, right? But when they're going to put the material on it to communicate with is way in the past. So it could have been seen when he went to give the blanket to him. So then it would have been there and he would have been like, Dad, why does this blanket say blah, 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 blah? Like, you didn't need it to, like, magically appear on a specific date that's closer to the event.
Well, and that's the thing, because they basically created a paradox. So when he gave it to him, because they've already rewritten history, it would have been seen right then.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of goes back to my whole issue with the paradoxical nature of the time travel in the Harry Potter series, and that they don't shore up these loose ends.
Yeah. They're like, oh, people, they'll just come along for the ride. They won't question it. It's fine. This is fine.
Yeah. I think that might be all of them on my list that we hadn't covered previously, because you and I had a lot of the same points going in.
Yeah, which any sane person would. I think overall we just end up on a theme of like, it's just one insane and illogical choice after another adding up into a piece of garbage that we're calling a canon story within the series, and it makes no sense whatsoever.
Kind of another weird thing was the very end, where I feel like they want to kind of merge all the families together. So they're just like, okay, Scorpius is now in love with Rose and is going to ask her out.
Yeah.
Like, he was always friendly with her, but I didn't get the impression throughout the entire story that he had romantic feelings towards her in any way. If anything, I felt like he had more romantic feelings towards Albus than he did towards any other character.
Oh yeah, like we could go on forever on how this is like a classic case of queer baiting.
Yeah.
But like that's gonna be a whole nother hour. I definitely got the vibe that that's where it was going, and then like they chickened out and they're like, oh, we gotta find someone to pair him with, so it's super clear that nothing gay is gonna happen.
Yeah, even to the point where they're like, I thought we weren't hugging anymore.
Yeah.
Like, really?
Ridiculous and gross.
Yeah. Also, like, I've more we talk about, the more issues I have that come up. Why are they just letting parents flew into Hogwarts?
Yeah, since
And
when is that a
specifically
thing?
into the headmistress office? Like, why are they just allowed to appear on McGonagall's rug?
Yeah, is it just because it's Harry? But no, because Malfoy does it too. So, yeah, what is that about? Is that we're taking advantage of a female headmistress?
That's kind of how it feels to me, or taking advantage of the familiarity of them. Like, there's been talk throughout the other books, like, Flu networks are heavily controlled, and certain Flu passages are specifically locked, so you cannot travel them without permissions.
Mm-hmm.
So do they have permissions just because of who they are?
Right? And like, why would we not lock Hogwarts? Like, that's insane.
Especially McGonagall's office.
Mm-hmm. Students could just flew in there and do whatever they want. Because apparently it's just open, willy-nilly.
Yeah, and then they, march down to the Slytherin common room, and they're like, we demand to see our kids. And
can you imagine?
Craig was his name, I think, which I'm assuming was like the head boy at that time or something. They didn't really explain who he was. Was just like, no, you can't unless you get permission. And then McGonagall magically is there at that exact moment to give them permission to.
Right. Oh, crap. We noticed another plot hole. Throw McGonagall in that hallway.
Yeah.
Insane. Like, but could you imagine if throughout the main series, Lucius Malfoy was just popping in whenever he wanted?
Well, and that's the thing. He would have been.
Yeah. He would have been there constantly.
If this were allowed under Dumbledore, Malfoy would have been there so often, but the only times we see him there are when he gives Dobby the sock, and towards the Triwizard Tournament, I think he's on site like one time.
And in the first couple books, where he has like cameos, for lack of a better word, it actually sort of makes sense because he's on the school board.
Yeah. But it's so weird that they're just like, they throw out all the rules because this is our plot point character.
Yeah.
They don't have rules around Harry.
Lisai. I'm sad for having read this twice.
That's so consistent with this story in general, in which Harry doesn't actually follow rules. He abuses all power he's given and does whatever he wants, and people just let him get away with it because he is the, you know, the prophesized one.
Mm-hmm. Even though he already fulfilled it. His time is over.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning in, Muggles. If you're jonesing for more witchy goodness between episodes, you can check us out on Instagram at Dusty Cauldron Podcast or on Facebook at the Dusty Cauldron Podcast Group. You can email us at dustycauldronpodcast@gmail.com or check out our website, www.dustycauldronpodcast.com. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening right now if you want to hear more. And remember, the Cursed Child is garbage, not canon, no matter what anybody tells you. And don't forget to stir whatever you've got brewing in your cauldron right now. Bye!
Bye.